Folks online always say, second time she drives through, use a 12 gauge. Easy fix. But I didn't need a shotgun. I had something better: patience, paperwork, and 3 rows of buried spike strips waiting under that dirt road. I'm Nate Lyman, 45 years old, and these 80 acres of Nebraska soil are everything I ever wanted out of life. Quiet mornings, slow rain, honest work. No HOA, no committees, no rules taped to mailboxes. Just me, my cattle, and the sound of wind moving through the corn. At least, that's how it was supposed to be. The first time I saw her, it was a Saturday morning in May. Bright sky, dew still clinging to the rows. I heard an engine before I saw it. Loud, expensive, impatient. Then a white SUV appeared over the rise like a ghost. It cut straight across my cornfield, throwing mud in perfect arcs. I remember standing there with my coffee, too shocked to even swear. She waved through the windshield like it was some kind of parade, and just like that, she was gone, back toward the gated homes of Creekview Bluffs. That was my introduction to Karen Whitfield, HOA Vice President, self-appointed Queen of Shortcuts. 2 days later, she did it again. Same track, same speed, same indifference. This time I managed to wave her down. She rolled her window halfway, sunglasses on, the kind with gold frames that cost more than my whole week's feed order. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice polite, "this is private property. You can't keep driving through here." She smiled, the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. "Relax, there's a community easement. It's been here since the 70s. Everyone knows that." "Not on my deed," I told her. "This road's mine. You're trespassing." She actually laughed. "Then maybe you bought the wrong land." And she drove around me like I wasn't even there. I went straight to my lawyer, Priya Menon, to check the records. No easement, not even a mention of shared access. Completely clean title, which meant every tire track in my soil was an act of trespass, plain and simple. You'd think that would be the end of it. It wasn't. By the third time, I'd started documenting everything. Dates, times, photos of the ruts through the corn. She didn't slow down, didn't even glance at the private road sign I put up. I guess to her, rules were for other people. My neighbor, Hank Doyle, saw her once and shook his head. "She's the kind that thinks the world's a cul-de-sac," he said. He wasn't wrong. The thing is, I wasn't raised to start fights. My old man taught me that patience wins more battles than anger ever will, but patience only works when the other side has a conscience. Karen didn't. When I sent her a certified cease and desist letter, she signed for it. I have the receipt, then tossed the envelope out her window right onto my property the next morning. I watched the paper scatter across the mud like confetti after a parade I never wanted. That was the moment I decided to stop being polite, not violent, not reckless, just done being ignored. People think country living makes you soft. Truth is, it just gives you more time to think. And after 6 months of being run over, literally, I had plenty of time to think about how to stop her legally and permanently. So I started planning, quietly, carefully, cameras, signs, documentation, every step by the book. And when the book wasn't enough, I wrote my own chapter. But before we get to that part, the part with the spike strips, you need to understand how far she pushed it and how much damage a single entitled person can do when nobody stands up to them. Because this story doesn't start with revenge. It starts with respect. And what happens when somebody decides yours doesn't matter? I didn't know much about the Creekview Bluffs community before all this started. I'd driven past their gated entrance a few times on the way to town, manicured hedges, a stone sign with gold lettering, and a row of cameras pointed at the road like sentinels. That was their world. Perfect lawns, polished driveways, and monthly meetings about mailbox colors. Mine was different. Dirt road, tin roof barn, a porch that creaked when the wind shifted. The kind of quiet you earn, not buy. But Karen Whitfield? She liked to think the world bent around her convenience. From what my neighbor Hank told me, she'd been the HOA vice president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made a sport out of enforcing rules. She once fined a man for leaving his garbage can out an extra 20 minutes. Another neighbor got a citation for planting the wrong kind of rose bush. That's the kind of person I was dealing with, the kind who had never heard the word no and accepted it. So, when she found that my dirt road shaved 8 minutes off her route to the main highway, She decided that was her God-given right. I tried talking to her again, one last time, before this thing got ugly. I caught her one afternoon when she stopped to take a phone call near the edge of my property. I walked up slow, hands visible, calm as a preacher. "Karen," I said, "you can't keep using this road. It's private. You're tearing up my crops." She didn't even look at me at first, just kept talking into her Bluetooth earpiece. When she finally did, she sighed like I'd interrupted something important. "Oh, Nate," she said, stretching my name like taffy. "This road's always been open. My husband checked the plats years ago." I told her again, there's no easement, no right-of-way, no access on record. She smiled, that condescending kind of smile people use when they think you're beneath them. "Well," she said, "you can take it up with the county if you want, but this road's part of our community plan. You're just not used to how we do things here." I remember staring at her for a moment, trying to decide whether she was lying or if she actually believed that nonsense. Turns out, it didn't matter. Either way, she wasn't going to stop. When she drove off, her tires spat gravel against my boots. I didn't say a word. I just watched the dust trail disappear into the horizon and thought, there goes someone who's never faced a consequence in her life. That night, I pulled out my property folder, the big manila one with my deed, survey maps, and tax records. I laid everything out on the kitchen table. My lawyer, Priya, had been thorough when I bought the place, and the documents were crystal clear. No recorded easements, no shared access, nothing. So I called her. "Priya," I said, "what do you do when someone drives through your land every day, claims it's legal, and won't listen to reason?" She paused. "You document everything. Every pass, every date. And if she keeps it up, we file. But be patient, Nate. Don't let her pull you into something stupid." She knew me well enough to know patience wasn't my problem. Being ignored was. The next morning, I set up a trail camera near the bend where she entered my property, one of those solar-powered wildlife cameras that logs date, time, and motion. That same evening, 7:13 p.m., it caught her white SUV gliding right across my field like a parade float. The next day, again, and again, 3 times in 1 week. I sent her a polite letter, certified mail, with return receipt, asking her to stop using my property. The postal tracking said she signed for it on a Thursday morning. Friday at sunrise, I heard her engine again. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee just in time to see her pass by, phone in one hand, other hand waving like royalty greeting a subject. She didn't just ignore my letter, she was mocking it. I remember setting my cup down slow, feeling that quiet kind of anger that doesn't make you yell. It just settles deep in your chest and stays there. I told myself, all right, if she wants official, she's going to get official. That's when I decided to involve the sheriff's office. Not because I thought they'd stop her, I already suspected they wouldn't, but because I wanted everything recorded, everything above board. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Because people like Karen never stop until something, or someone, makes them. The next week, I decided to give her no excuse. No more misunderstandings, no more pretending she didn't know. Saturday morning, I put up new signs along my dirt road. Big aluminum ones, bright yellow backgrounds, red reflective letters that could be seen from half a mile away. Private road, no through traffic. Trespassers will be reported. I even added a smaller sign under one that said, "Smile, you're on camera." It felt ridiculous, honestly, like I was child-proofing my own property against a grown woman with a luxury SUV. But out here, you learn to document everything. The law doesn't care about how right you feel. It cares about what you can prove. I took photos of every sign with date stamps and GPS tags, sent copies to my lawyer, Priya, and even emailed them to the sheriff's office, just in case. By Tuesday, the signs were already leaning. By Wednesday, one was down. And by Thursday, I caught the reason on my trail cam. Karen's SUV slowing just enough for her to roll down the window, reach out with a long metal rod, and smack one of my signs sideways before speeding off again. That video still makes my blood boil. I remember showing it to my neighbor Hank over coffee. He watched in silence, then muttered, "She's either fearless or stupid, maybe both." He wasn't wrong. I tried to stay calm. I really did. But by then, her daily route had turned into a game. Every morning, 7:15 sharp, the rumble of her tires shook the barn windows. Every evening, just before sunset, she'd roar back the same way, honking twice like a victory lap. At first, the damage was just to the road, ruts in the dirt, corn stalks flattened, a little topsoil thrown around. Then it started affecting my livestock. I keep about 20 head of cattle, and most days they're calm as can be, but that engine of hers, the horn, the speed, it started spooking them bad. I'd find hoof prints scattered near the fence line, one calf limping from where it slipped trying to run. I had 3 pregnant cows that spring, all due around the same time. One of them, Daisy, was nervous by nature, and every time that white SUV tore through, she'd jump and kick at the fence, snorting and pacing. I talked to the sheriff's office again, asked to speak with whoever was available. That's when I met Deputy Elena Ruiz, young, fair, and one of the few around here who still listened before talking. She drove out, walked the property with me, and looked over my documentation, the photos, the videos, the signed letter. She nodded a lot, frowned a few times, and finally said the words I'd been expecting. "Mr. Lyman, everything you're doing is right, but technically, this is a civil issue unless I catch her in the act and she refuses to leave. Best I can do is talk to her, maybe scare her straight." I sighed. "So, she keeps driving through until you happen to be here when she does." Ruiz gave me a sympathetic smile. "I'll put it in the report. Maybe a warning from me will slow her down." She was good to her word. Drove over to Creekview that afternoon. 2 hours later, she called me. "Well, Nate," she said, "I talked to her. She claims you're harassing her, says she's got paperwork proving an easement, looked like copies of old maps, but I'm no surveyor." "Fake paperwork," I said quietly. "Probably," Ruiz agreed, "but again, until the court says otherwise, I can't arrest her for trespassing if she says she believes she has access. My advice, keep documenting. The more you have, the better." So that's what I did. Every pass, every time stamp, every sound of her tires rolling through. By then, it wasn't just trespassing. It was psychological warfare. She'd speed up just near the barn, honk once, and I swear she'd do it just to see if I'd react. I didn't. I just noted the time, clicked the camera, and watched. Patience isn't weakness, it's preparation. But patience has limits. And the morning I found Daisy trembling by the fence, sweat streaked down her flank, and a section of wire bent where she'd panicked again, that limit started to crack. I looked out across that dirt road, the same one Karen treated like a public highway, and I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to touch a gun. I wasn't going to yell or chase her down, but I was done letting her run my land like it was hers. Next time she came through, something was going to change. Legally, permanently, and on my terms. After that morning with Daisy, I stopped pretending this was a small problem. It was a pattern, a deliberate daily trespass with consequences that went beyond a few flattened corn stalks. It was costing me money, worrying my stock, and wearing down the quiet I'd paid for. Enough was enough. So I began the boring, tedious work that wins cases and, more often than not, wins peace, paperwork. I pulled out the old manila folder I kept for the farm, the one with the deed and the survey map, and every bill or receipt I'd thought worth keeping. I added a new section that day, incidents. Each entry started with the cold facts, date, time, direction of travel, weather, and the exact location where the SUV cut across my land. I wrote down what the ground looked like, how deep the ruts were, and whether any plants were destroyed. I took photographs from at least 3 angles and backed them up to 2 separate hard drives and cloud storage. Copies went to Priya the same afternoon. Priya liked to say that lawyers are basically historians with better handwriting. She told me to treat every moment like evidence, because, in the end, evidence is the only language that matters in a courtroom. "Don't rely on your anger, Nate," she said. "Rely on a timeline." So, I made a timeline. I set up an additional trail camera with a wider view, put in a couple of motion sensors, and purchased a small GPS logger to timestamp the photos. If that sounds technical, it's only because I used to manage logistics. I'm wired to track things. I put little reflective stakes where the tire ruts were deepest, and in the folder I kept a scanned copy of the certified cease and desist letter she'd signed for. I put the vet bill for Daisy in too, with a note about the date and the circumstances, the kind of mundane, cold document that would make a judge look up from his coffee and pay attention. I also documented every interaction with the sheriff's office. Deputy Ruiz would send a quick email after her visits, name, time, summary. I forwarded those to Priya and saved the originals. There's something comforting about an official's brief, factual words. They don't yell, they don't sneer, they simply note what happened. People hear the word document and think of stapled papers. But documentation, as I learned, is a living thing. It's phone calls logged, receipts kept, a neighbor's signed declaration, a video file that proves 1,000 words wrong. Hank wrote a short statement, just a paragraph, saying he'd seen the SUV cut across my field multiple times, and that he'd noticed my cows were jumpy. He signed it and dated it. I made him a coffee and thanked him. Good neighbors make good witnesses. There was a harder part too, the part where you figure out where to draw the line. I spend a long time arguing with myself. People in the comments on YouTube say things you can't unhear. Second time, 12 gauge. It's a knee-jerk internet-savvy thing, and it makes for dramatic talk. But that's not how I wanted my story to end. My dad taught me a saying, you can be angry without being a criminal. I repeated it like a prayer. Priya laid out options. We could file a civil suit for trespass and damages. We could petition for a formal injunction. We could ask the county to do a boundary survey. Each option came with a timeline and a cost. She warned me straight. If you do anything that could be construed as a trap or a booby trap, you risk criminal exposure. Don't do that. She said it gently, but the point landed like a brick. She was my lawyer, she didn't want me in jail, and she didn't want my home tied up in another man's headline. She did, however, give me a push toward one legal tool she thought would be effective: deterrence that disabled vehicles without risking human harm, devices law enforcement sometimes uses to stop vehicles safely. She emphasized we would be doing this differently. Everything exactly documented, every warning posted plainly, and full disclosure to the sheriff before anything happened. If you want to use a deterrent, Priya said, you use it transparently. You give notice. You involve the police. You leave nothing to chance. I ordered the equipment that day through a legitimate vendor with an invoice and serial numbers and shipping to my address. I did not call anyone to brag. I didn't need to. I spent the afternoon testing cameras, checking angles, and making sure the signs were readable at dawn. I bought extra batteries and a weatherproof case for a recorder. The goal was not to set a trap. It was to create a final line of defense that left no plausible deniability. On my legal checklist, the last items read like a to-do list before a surgery. Notify sheriff, post multiple signs, prepare an evidence kit, verify the devices are non-lethal and used in compliance with local law. I called Deputy Ruiz and told her I'd bought deterrent equipment and that my plan was to notify her in writing before deploying anything. Her voice on the phone was steady. Do it by the book, Nate. We'll come out and look at the signs and the setup before anything happens. If you document everything, you'll protect yourself. If you hide things, you won't. There was a quiet satisfaction in filing the final folder. It felt less like escalation and more like armor. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing for responsibility. That night I slept poorly, but with a clean conscience. The next morning, before sunup, I walked the property and checked the camera angles once more. The corn looked calm. The road lay like a line of possibility across the land. Somewhere, on the other side of that line, someone thought she could keep walking over what I'd built. I closed the folder and set it on the kitchen table, next to the big manila envelope labeled Incidents. If the worst came, if the court called my name, I wanted to walk in with every fact neat and ready, because I wasn't going to shoot someone. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to do it with paperwork, with law enforcement on notice, and with the kind of patience that had carried me from one job to the next, one season to the next. And if she still thought she owned my road after all that, well, then she'd have to face the consequences in a way she couldn't laugh off. I woke up before dawn that Tuesday with a kind of nervous focus I hadn't felt since I left the warehouses. There's something about knowing you did the prep work right, that clean, practical satisfaction of a plan, and I carried it like a warm coat against the cold. First thing, I drove into town and picked up more signs. Bigger ones this time, heavy aluminum, reflective paint, the kind a county crew might put up on a dangerous curve. I wanted anyone rolling down that lane at dawn to have no excuse for not seeing them. They read plain and blunt: private road, no through. Traffic vehicle deterrent devices in use. Tire damage will occur, all activity recorded. I placed them every 50 feet along the stretch she'd been using, on posts sunk deep enough that a gust wouldn't tilt them. I took photos at each post and logged the GPS coordinates like a surveyor. It felt a little theatrical, to be honest. Signs that bold. But again, this was about removing wiggle room. I didn't want her or anyone else claiming later they hadn't known. Next, I emailed Deputy Ruiz. Attachment, copies of the signs, timestamps, the serial numbers of the deterrent equipment I'd purchased, and the invoice proving purchase from a licensed vendor. The message was short and to the point. I will be deploying vehicle deterrent devices on my private road within the coming week. I invite you and the sheriff's office to inspect the signage and plan prior to deployment. All documentation is attached. Her reply came quickly, the kind that reads like an endorsement without being a promise. I'll be there Friday morning. Bring everything. We'll document it. I felt steadier after that. If the sheriff knew, if the paperwork was clear, someone else would be the one to ask the uncomfortable questions later when the shouting started. Priya and I met in her office that afternoon. She's the kind of lawyer who talks softly and thinks loud. She hands you legal reality wrapped in practical steps. We reviewed the folder, the timeline, the camera footage, Hank's statement, the vet bill. She nodded, asked a few pointed questions, then finally said, "You've done your due diligence, Nate. Keep the sheriff included." Post signs so large they're impossible to miss. And when, not if, you deploy anything, make sure it's documented and that any damage is strictly to property, not people. Can the sheriff backside me if something goes sideways? I asked. If you hide it, yes, Priya said. If you document it, notify them, and use devices intended to disable vehicles without injuring occupants, you make a strong case that you acted reasonably to stop repeated trespass and property damage. Reasonable. That's the legal heartbeat. It's not about what feels satisfying, it's about what stands up under oath. Friday morning, Deputy Ruiz and another deputy drove out to the farm. I'd left the signs up and set out a small table with copies of everything. The certified mail receipt, photos, a printout of the county parcel map showing my deed, and an indexed list of my camera files. Ruiz walked the line, squinted at the reflective paint in the morning sun, and then looked at me. "They're hard to miss," she said simply. We went over the deterrent equipment together, specifications, manufacturer instructions, the invoice. Ruiz examined the packaging, checked the serial numbers, and made a few notes. We talked about safety contingencies, what to do if a vehicle became incapacitated in a dangerous position, how to handle a panicked driver, which tow companies were authorized, and what emergency numbers to call. We discussed how to preserve evidence, leave the device in place, document everything, and let the deputies catalog it if a case opened. There was no thrill in it, just the practical business of harm reduction and paperwork. I liked that about Elena. She wouldn't cheer me on. She would make sure I couldn't be accused of playing cowboy. She issued me a short note at the end of the visit, a patrol record that said she inspected the signage and the equipment and noted my written notification. "This will go in the file," she told me. "If she returns and ignores the warnings, you call us immediately. We'll come out, we'll document, and we'll act." That was all I wanted. Witnesses, documentation, a record that I'd asked for everything to be open and above board. I tested the equipment once, carefully, with my pickup in a flat, controlled space to make sure it behaved the way the manual promised. It disabled the tires without making the vehicle fishtail or lurch uncontrollably, exactly as advertised. I took video of the test, labeled the clips, and added them to the evidence kit. The rest of the week was a blur of small tasks, replacing a couple of stakes the raccoons had nudged, checking camera batteries, setting a secondary camera on a pole for a wider angle. Hank dropped by with a thermos of coffee and looked around with a farmer's practical approval. "You've gone thorough, Nate," he said. "No holes to hide in now." "No holes to hide in," I agreed. There was a strange comfort in being meticulous. It wasn't about pettiness or triumph. It was about responsibility. The responsibility to my land, my animals, and my neighbors. If people were going to cross that line, they would do it knowing exactly what the consequences would be. By Saturday night, everything was in place. Signs, cameras, the equipment packed and inspected, a folder full of time-stamped evidence, and a patrol record from the sheriff's office. I locked the barn and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, The kind of cup that leaves ring marks like a time signature on the table. Someone once told me, prepare like you expect to win, work like you expect to lose. I don't know who said it, but the words fit that night. I'd prepared to win quietly, with proof, with law enforcement aware, and with no room for theatrics. Now, all that was left was to wait and see if the signs and the law would do what I could not: make an entitled person stop. Because whether she backed down or rolled forward, the line had been drawn, and I'd done it by the book. There's a strange kind of calm that comes before something you know is going to change your life. That Sunday night, the air was thick with it. The crickets outside hummed in the darkness, and every once in a while, I'd hear the wind scrape across the tin roof of the barn. I couldn't sleep much. My mind kept running through the checklist. Cameras, signs, sheriff notified, equipment ready. Everything was in place, every I dotted, every T crossed. I'd done my part. The rest was up to fate, or more accurately, up to Karen Whitfield. When the alarm went off at 6, I was already awake. I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead and sat at the kitchen table watching the live camera feeds on my laptop. The world outside was still blue and soft, dew shining on the corn. For a moment, it looked peaceful again. I almost believed it might stay that way. At 6:45, the first truck rumbled by on County Road 12, Hank, heading to town for feed. We waved at each other like always. He slowed, rolled down his window, and shouted across the ditch, "You think she'll show up today?" I smiled without humor. "She's never missed a Monday." He nodded, the way farmers do when they don't need to say more, and drove on. Back inside, I checked the timestamp overlay on the cameras. Every angle was perfect, one facing the entry bend, another at mid-road, one catching the open field where she always cut across. The sun was rising fast now, slanting gold across the barn's tin wall. My heart was steady, but there was a tightness in my chest that felt like waiting for thunder. 6:58, 7:03, 7:09. For a few seconds I started to wonder if maybe she'd listened this time. Maybe Ruiz's visit or the new signs had gotten through. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally realized the road wasn't hers to take. Then at 7:14, the first flicker appeared on the western camera, sunlight bouncing off chrome. There she was. The white SUV rolled over the ridgeline, same speed as always. The camera zoom caught the shimmer of her gold sunglasses. I could almost hear the sound before the mic even registered it, that steady growl of an engine doing 35 down a dirt road. She passed the first sign without slowing, then the second, then the third. Bright red letters reflecting in the morning sun, warning her clear as day. Vehicle deterrent devices in use. She didn't brake, didn't hesitate. It was like she believed the warnings were meant for someone else. I felt my pulse quicken. The monitor showed her approaching the first deterrent, a strip set just beneath the surface dust, designed to flex up and pierce tires safely. 10 yards, 5, then the sound. Pop, pop. A second later, 2 more. Pop, pop. The front tires went instantly soft. The SUV lurching forward with a nose dip. She kept rolling, probably thinking she'd hit a rock or debris. 5 seconds later, the rear tires met the same fate. Now the SUV was dragging on its rims, slowing but still moving. I leaned closer to the screen, breath held. She had maybe 20 yards before the second set. When she hit it, the sound was sharper. Metal on metal, the shriek of grinding rims. The SUV jerked, shuddered, then rolled to a stop in the middle of the road. Dust swirled around her like a slow-motion storm. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. My hands were steady. I didn't feel triumph, not really, just relief. Relief that it was over, and that she was safe enough to climb out and face what she'd done. For a long moment, the SUV sat there idling, brake lights glowing red through the dust. Then the door opened. Karen stepped out, moving stiff, like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. She walked around the vehicle, stared at the flattened tires, and then kicked at one of them. The sound of her voice reached the mic, muffled, angry, high-pitched. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I'd seen that kind of rage before. The rage of someone who's never been told no until the world itself enforces it. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Sheriff's office," the dispatcher answered. "This is Nate Lyman, County Road 12. I've got a trespasser on my property. Vehicle disabled by posted deterrent devices. No injuries. Please send a deputy." The dispatcher took the info, voice calm. We'll send someone right out, Mr. Lyman. I set the phone down and looked back at the monitors. Karen was pacing now, shouting into her own phone, gesturing wildly. Dust drifted through the early light behind her like smoke. That was the picture, her standing in the middle of my road, the SUV crippled behind her, and my warning signs gleaming like verdicts on either side. I saved all 3 camera feeds to the folder labeled Incident 7:14 a.m., backed them up twice, and closed the laptop. Then I stepped outside. The air was cool, sharp, and clean, and for the first time in 6 months, the sound that filled it wasn't the roar of her engine, it was silence. When I walked out of the barn, the morning sun had fully crested the hill, spreading gold light across the field. Karen's white SUV sat dead center on the dirt road, tilted slightly forward. 4 shredded tires collapsed into the dust. You could smell hot rubber and metal, that tangy mix of friction and fury. She was pacing beside it, phone in hand, voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of the insects. I couldn't hear every word until I got closer, but I caught enough to know she wasn't talking to the police. She was yelling at her husband. "Completely destroyed! Yes, all 4! It's his fault! He did this! I told you we should have—" Then she saw me walking toward her and cut the call short. Her eyes locked on me, bright with disbelief and rage. "What the hell did you do to my car?" she screamed. I stopped about 10 feet away, boots sinking slightly in the soft dirt. I kept my voice level. "I warned you, Karen, 6 times, in writing, with signs, certified mail, and 2 sheriff's visits. You ignored all of them." "You tried to kill me," she shouted, pointing at the road like it had attacked her. "You set traps. That's illegal. You're going to jail for this." I raised my phone, made sure the screen was recording, and said calmly, "This is my private property. You've been trespassing for 6 months, despite repeated warnings. I notified law enforcement and posted clear signage that vehicle deterrent devices were in use. You chose to ignore those warnings." Her expression twisted. Not fear, not guilt, just pure offense. "Those signs are fake," she snapped. "You made them up. This is HOA access, and you know it." I gestured around us, to the corn, the fencing, the wide sky. "Karen, this isn't part of your HOA. Never was. This road's been private since it was cut in 1978. You've seen the deed." She folded her arms, shaking her head so hard her sunglasses nearly flew off. "You think you can just do this and get away with it? You've damaged my vehicle, a $90,000 Escalade. You'll pay for every cent." I smiled slightly, not from joy, but exhaustion. "If I were you, I'd save that speech for Deputy Ruiz. She's on her way." That made her freeze for just a second. "You called the police?" "I didn't call the police," I corrected. "I called your witnesses." That hit her. She turned pale, then flushed red. Her voice cracked behind glass. "You think this is over? My husband's the HOA president. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I said, still recording. "Someone who believes boundaries don't apply if she doesn't like them." For a moment, she didn't answer. She just glared, breathing heavy, the way a cornered animal looks at a fence, ready to kick, but out of options. Then she did what entitled people do best. She tried to flip the story. She raised her own phone, started filming, and spoke loudly as if to an audience. "I'm being held hostage on my property by a violent man. He set spike traps to destroy my car. This is assault. Attempted murder." That almost made me laugh, but I kept my tone even. "My name is Nate Lyman. This is my land. Mrs. Whitfield drove onto it without permission despite multiple posted warnings. Her tires were damaged by deterrent devices clearly marked every 50 feet. She is not injured. She is trespassing." Her phone wobbled slightly. She wasn't expecting composure. She was expecting fear. "I'm calling my lawyer," she hissed. "You should," I said. "You'll want him here when the deputy arrives." For a few seconds, the only sounds were the wind and the low ticking of her SUV's engine cooling in the heat. Then, in the distance, I heard gravel crunching. Blue and red lights flashed at the far end of the road. Karen straightened her posture like an actress ready for a close-up. "Oh, thank God," she said loudly, as if someone were filming. Officer, over here." Deputy Ruiz stepped out of the patrol car, hat low against the glare, clipboard in hand. I'd seen that look before. Steady, patient, but firm. She scanned the scene once, then twice, then looked at me. "Morning, Mr. Lyman." "Morning, Deputy." What's going on here? Before I could answer, Karen rushed forward, her words tumbling over themselves. This man tried to kill me. He planted spikes on public property. Look what he did to my car. She gestured wildly toward the Escalade, her voice breaking on the edge of tears. He's insane. He's been harassing me for months. Ruiz listened without interrupting, her pen barely moving. When Karen finally ran out of breath, Ruiz turned to me. Mr. Lyman? I handed her the folder I'd prepared, the one marked incident reports and evidence. Inside were printouts of my certified letters, photos of the signs, camera screenshots, the deed, and a copy of the patrol note Ruiz herself had written after inspecting the deterrent setup. Ruiz flipped through it calmly. You kept everything. Yes, ma'am. 3 camera angles recorded this morning's event. All files are backed up and time-stamped. Karen let out a loud scoff. That's all fake. He staged this. He probably edited those videos. Ruiz looked at her evenly. Mrs. Whitfield, do you have documentation proving you have a legal right to use this road? Karen blinked. My lawyer does. Do you have it with you? Ruiz asked again. No, but... Then please stop talking, Ruiz said, voice firm. You're trespassing on clearly marked private property, and your vehicle is disabled because you ignored those warnings. You'll receive a citation for criminal trespass. The matter of your vehicle damage is civil. You'll need to arrange for towing at your expense. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find the words. You can't arrest me. I'm the victim, Ruiz wrote on her pad without looking up. You're welcome to explain that to the judge. I stood there quietly, arms folded, watching as the truth finally caught up to her. Not vengeance, not victory, just the heavy quiet of consequences. The tow truck's rumble echoed from the main road. Ruiz turned to me. You want to press charges, Nate? I looked at the flattened crops, the ruined road, the ghost of Daisy in the back of my mind. Yes, ma'am, I said. I do. The sound of that tow truck on the gravel was like the closing note to a long, ugly song. You could hear it a full half-mile away, the downshift, the metallic rattle of chains, the low diesel hum that meant somebody's day was about to get worse. Deputy Ruiz finished writing the citation while Karen stood there in the dirt, arms crossed tight, lips trembling between fury and panic. Her phone was still clutched in her hand like a talisman, but the performance was fading. She wasn't yelling anymore. She was cornered by facts and cameras. When the tow truck crested the hill, the driver slowed, eyes wide at the sight of the SUV. Morning, deputy, he called. Guess somebody had themselves a rough commute. Ruiz nodded toward Karen. Mrs. Whitfield's vehicle, 4 flats, property damage. You're here to recover it. The driver, name tag read Walt, gave a low whistle. All 4? That's a new record. Karen snapped, just get it out of here. Walt shrugged, backed up the flatbed, and started lowering the winch. The sound of metal scraping on metal made her flinch. I stood a few yards away, quiet, watching the scene like it wasn't real, just another long day of farm life that somehow veered off course. Ruiz handed me a copy of the report for my signature. You're pressing charges, correct? Yes, ma'am. Trespass and property damage. Understood. She tore off the carbon sheet and turned to Karen. Mrs. Whitfield, you're being cited for criminal trespassing. You'll receive your court date within 2 weeks. You're also responsible for removing this vehicle from Mr. Lyman's property at your expense. Karen's face went pale. You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. It's a civil issue. Ruiz's voice stayed steady. It stopped being civil when you ignored written warnings and destroyed private property. That was the moment she broke. Not dramatically, not with tears, just cracked. Her hands started shaking, and her voice dropped into something small. You don't understand. My husband's the HOA president. He'll fix this. He'll call the sheriff himself. Ruiz didn't flinch. You're welcome to call him, but right now, you're standing on someone else's land with no legal right to be here. That's what I understand. Karen dialed. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Still nothing. Then she tried her lawyer. This time, someone picked up. I could hear the tinny voice through the receiver. Victoria, it's too early. What's going on? It's Karen, not Victoria, she snapped. I'm stuck out here. The farmer laid traps. My car's destroyed. The voice on the other end interrupted, calm but curt. Karen, I told you last week. You were advised not to use that road. You were warned there's no valid easement. What? You said, I said we'd review it. I didn't tell you to keep trespassing. Don't discuss this further. We'll talk in the office. Click. She just stared at her phone like it had betrayed her. Ruiz finished writing the citation and handed it over. Ma'am, sign here to acknowledge receipt. It's not an admission of guilt. It just confirms you have received the citation. Karen hesitated, then scrawled her name with a shaking hand. Her designer pen left a small smear of ink where the paper bent on the patrol car's hood. Walt called out, All set, deputy. Want it towed to her place or the impound lot? Ruiz looked at Karen. Your choice. Karen's voice cracked. Just take it home. That'll be $6.50 total, Walt said, plus a mileage fee if we go through town traffic. Karen fumbled through her purse, pulled out a sleek black card, and handed it over like it weighed 50 pounds. Walt slid it into his reader. Declined, he said simply. Her face went white. Run it again. He did. Same result. Ruiz folded her arms. Mrs. Whitfield, do you have another form of payment? Karen looked at me, not out of defiance, but pure disbelief, like the world had flipped upside down. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I shook my head. No, ma'am. I'm just relieved it's finally documented. After a pause, she pulled out another card. This one worked. Walt handed her the receipt. She signed it quickly, avoiding everyone's eyes. When the tow truck pulled away, the SUV perched awkwardly on its bed. There was a kind of silence that settled over the field, heavy, final, and strangely peaceful. Ruiz tore off the last page of the report and gave it to me. We'll file this today. Expect a follow-up from the DA's office. You did everything right, Nate. Full transparency, proper warnings, and no harm to the person. You've protected yourself. I nodded, exhaling for what felt like the first time all morning. Thank you, Deputy, for taking it seriously. Ruiz gave a small smile. Sometimes people need to learn that no trespassing isn't a suggestion. Karen stood there alone as the patrol car lights dimmed. Her shoes were covered in dust, her hands trembling as she clutched the citation. She looked smaller than she had 20 minutes ago, deflated. Before Ruiz left, she leaned toward Karen and said softly, Ma'am, for your own sake, don't come back here again. Next time, it won't just be tires. Karen didn't respond. She just stared down the road where her SUV had disappeared. When the last echo of the tow truck faded, I turned toward the barn. The dirt road was quiet again, except for the faint hiss of wind through the grass. For the first time in months, I felt the calm that I'd bought this land for. No engine, no horn, no arrogance cutting through the peace. Still, I couldn't help thinking as I walked back to the porch. People like her rarely stop after being embarrassed. They double down. And I had a feeling this story wasn't done writing itself just yet. 2 quiet days. That's all I got before the next storm rolled in. Not on wheels this time, but on letterhead. Wednesday morning, I found a certified envelope sticking out of my mailbox. Fancy blue logo, heavy paper, the kind of stationery meant to scare you before you even open it. The return address read, Whitfield and Associates, Attorneys at Law. I poured coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. Inside was a 6-page letter full of capital letters and legal chest thumping. The headline hit first, Notice of Intent to Pursue Damages, Reckless Endangerment and Property Destruction. According to Karen's attorney, I had willfully endangered a motorist by deploying hazardous devices on an active access road, resulting in significant emotional distress and loss of property. They demanded $42,000 in damages, the estimated repair costs plus compensation for trauma and humiliation. I read it twice, then laughed once. It wasn't joy, just disbelief. $42,000 for someone who'd ignored 6 warnings, 2 certified letters, a sheriff's inspection, and 30 reflective signs the size of dinner tables. I picked up the phone and called Priya. Morning, Nate, she answered. How's peace and quiet treating you? About as quiet as a thunderstorm, I said. You're gonna love this one. She listened as I read the letter out loud. Every few sentences she made a small sound, half sigh, half chuckle. When I finished, she said, Good, this is actually great news. Great news? Yes, because they just gave me everything I need to bury this thing legally. They overplayed. Priya explained how the tone of the letter, the exaggerated language, the emotional distress claims, the lack of factual acknowledgement, meant Karen's side was bluffing. They're fishing, she said. They're hoping you'll panic and settle. But with what you've got documented, they're walking into a buzzsaw. Then let's give them the buzzsaw, I said. We spent the next 2 hours on the phone building a counterclaim, meticulous, calm, and ironclad. Priya's voice took on that steady rhythm lawyers get when they're in their zone. We'll include every verifiable loss, she said. Crop damage, the destroyed gate, the vet bill, and emotional distress for 6 months of trespass. I opened my logbook and started reading her numbers. 23 corn rows destroyed across 6 months. Estimated yield loss, 14. 1 gate and chain cut, 450. Vet bill for Daisy's miscarriage, 4,000. Trail camera replacements and maintenance, 820. Countless hours of interference, stress, and livestock disruption. Priceless. But legally, we valued it at 20,000. Then came the big one, punitive damages. Priya wanted them included to send a message. When someone acts willfully and maliciously after repeated warnings, courts allow exemplary damages, she said. We'll make the total 28,000 actual, plus punitive. I smiled. So, they started a fight over 42,000 and could end up paying twice that? Exactly, she replied. And because they filed the first complaint, they have handed us the chance to respond with full documentation. We'll attach every photo, every certified receipt, every police report, every time-stamped file. Let's drown them in their own arrogance. That night, I watched the sun sink over the cornfields, the sky turning that soft red gold that always reminds me why I left the city. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, and ready to let the paper do the fighting for me. 2 days later, Priya sent me a draft of the counterclaim. It was a masterpiece of calm fury. She didn't use one unnecessary word. Every paragraph began with a date, a document, or a quote. On March 25, Defendant Whitfield entered Mr. Lyman's property without permission, cutting a chain lock and damaging private fencing. On March 18, 25, despite written warnings, defendant again traversed the property, causing crop destruction and livestock distress. On June 9, 25, defendant ignored posted warnings about deterrent devices and continued trespassing, resulting in self-inflicted vehicle damage. 6 months of my life condensed into legal language sharp enough to cut glass. At the end, Priya added a closing line that read like poetry. This matter is not one of misunderstanding but of entitlement, the belief that rules apply only to others. The defendant's actions, willful and repetitive, left the plaintiff no choice but to defend his property through lawful documented means. I read it twice and said, "That's beautiful. It's also bulletproof," she said. I'm sending it certified to both her personal attorney and the HOA's counsel. Expect silence, the kind that means they're scrambling. She was right. A week went by. No letters, no phone calls, no white SUV roaring down my road. Instead, my neighbor Hank came by one evening with a grin and a story. "You're not going to believe this," he said, leaning on the fence post. "Your little tire popper incident's gone local. Facebook's full of it. Folks from Creekview are calling her Spike Strip Sally." I tried not to laugh, but I couldn't help it. "You're kidding." Wish I was. Even the HOA's board had to hold an emergency meeting. Rumor is one of their assistant treasurers, Patricia something, started asking where all the legal funds were going. That made me pause mid-sip. "Legal funds?" "Yeah," Hank said. "Word is, your girl's been using HOA money to pay her lawyer. Folks are mad as hornets about it." I set the mug down, staring across the dusk-lit fields. If that was true, then Karen's legal tantrum had just opened a bigger can of worms than she realized. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens or gavels. Sometimes it comes in envelopes and receipts. A week after Hank's porch talk, I started hearing the same rumor from 3 different people, which, in a small Nebraska county, usually means something big's about to happen. It began with a phone call from the county clerk's office. The woman on the other end, Sandy, spoke with that mix of curiosity and careful professionalism. "Mr. Lyman," she said, "did you by any chance file a formal complaint against the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association?" "No, ma'am," I said, "just Mrs. Whitfield personally." She made a low sound. "Well, someone did. Anonymous tip. The county's auditors just got a request to look into their books. Word is something about misuse of community funds." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window toward the quiet road. "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "They've been financing a war that wasn't theirs." Sandy chuckled softly. That's one way to put it. After we hung up, I called Hank, and he filled in the rest. Apparently, Patricia Chen, the HOA's assistant treasurer, had started digging into the association's financial records. Patricia wasn't some nosy neighbor. She was a retired accountant from Lincoln, sharp as a blade, and she didn't like numbers that didn't add up. She asked to review their expense reports, Hank said, and found payments marked as legal retainers going out every month, about 8-9 grand a pop. That's a lot of retainer for one trespassing case, I said. Exactly, Hank replied. Turns out the payments were all going to a firm in Omaha, same one that sent you that $42,000 letter. I sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. Karen had been using HOA money to fund her personal legal fight. It was one thing to trespass on someone's land. It was another to drag an entire community into it and make them pay for her arrogance. 2 days later, the story hit the local paper. HOA treasurer under audit for misuse of community funds. The headline wasn't dramatic, but the article underneath was brutal. It named names: Karen Whitfield, treasurer; Richard Whitfield, HOA president; and Patricia Chen, assistant treasurer and whistleblower. The piece quoted Patricia directly. I began noticing irregularities when we had multiple legal disbursements listed under property boundary defense. There were no such disputes involving community property. When I traced the invoices, they led directly to legal representation for Mrs. Whitfield's private case. It went on to say that the HOA board had convened an emergency meeting and placed both Karen and Richard on administrative leave pending a full forensic audit. I won't lie, I read the article 3 times. Not out of glee, but out of something deeper. Validation. All I'd ever wanted was for someone to call the truth by its name. That weekend, the quiet town of Meadowbrook buzzed like a kicked beehive. My neighbor Dale said the HOA board's group chat leaked screenshots, panicked messages from members realizing their dues had funded a personal lawsuit. Someone even posted a picture of Karen's Escalade, still dented, still without its rims, parked in her driveway like a monument to bad decisions. Then the audit findings came out. According to the forensic accountant's report, over the past 2 years, Karen had embezzled roughly $60,000 from HOA accounts. Small withdrawals here and there, miscellaneous vendor payments to shell companies that turned out to be her personal contractors. One invoice was literally for landscaping consultation, paid to a firm owned by her cousin in Kansas City. When confronted, Richard tried to claim ignorance. My wife handled the finances, he told reporters, but it was too late. The board voted unanimously to remove them both. A week later, the sheriff's office, same one where Deputy Ruiz worked, confirmed that a criminal investigation was underway. Karen was officially under review for fraud and embezzlement. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Life was doing the arithmetic on its own. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I drove into town for supplies and stopped at the diner. The locals were buzzing like cicadas. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and listened. "Did you hear?" one man said. "They froze her accounts. HOA's pressing charges. Guess her shopping spree's finally caught up." A woman across the booth added, "Heard she tried to blame the assistant treasurer. Said Patricia misinterpreted the ledgers. Can you imagine?" They all laughed. I didn't. I just stirred my coffee and thought about how fast arrogance can rot into pity. That afternoon, Priya called. "You're not going to believe this, Nate," she said, her tone somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "The HOA's new interim president just sent me an apology letter, a formal one, acknowledging that the association was not involved in Mrs. Whitfield's actions and that she misused their funds." "You're kidding," I said. "Nope, it's real. Signed and notarized. They even offered to mediate restitution for your damages if you were open to settling the civil side quietly." I smiled, watching the wind ripple through the corn outside my window. "I don't want their money, Priya. I just want my peace." She paused. "You already won that." She was right. For the first time in nearly 7 months, I could stand on my porch, look down that dirt road, and not feel dread. The signs were still there, shining bright in the sun, but now they were just reminders, not warnings. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It doesn't need a gavel or applause. Sometimes it's a quiet line drawn in the dirt, one you refuse to let anyone cross. The courthouse in Lincoln wasn't much to look at. A squat sandstone building with a single flag out front and steps worn smooth from a century of feet. I'd only been there twice before in my life, once for jury duty, once for a zoning hearing about an irrigation ditch. But that April morning, when I walked through the doors with my lawyer Priya by my side, it felt like the final mile of a marathon I hadn't meant to run. Karen Whitfield was already inside. I spotted her across the room, sitting at the defendant's table with a different lawyer this time, younger, quieter, and clearly exhausted. She looked smaller than I remembered. No designer sunglasses, no jewelry, no air of superiority. Just a woman in a gray suit that didn't fit quite right and eyes that hadn't slept. The clerk read the case number, and the murmur of the courtroom fell into that strange hush that always precedes accountability. State of Nebraska vs. Karen Whitfield. The charges: criminal trespass, property destruction, and misuse of HOA funds. The property damage and trespass were my part. The embezzlement came later, from the audit. The DA had bundled them into a plea hearing to avoid dragging the whole community through a full trial. When the judge, a silver-haired woman named Carson, took her seat, everyone stood. Then it began. Karen's lawyer spoke first. His tone was careful, rehearsed, like someone trying to defuse a bomb without touching the wires. "Your Honor," he said, "my client acknowledges poor judgment in handling this matter. She believed, in good faith, that there was an existing easement and that she was entitled to access through Mr. Lyman's property. That belief, though mistaken, was not malicious." I didn't react. Priya didn't either. We'd expected that line. The prosecutor, a lean, no-nonsense man from the county, stood next. "With respect, Your Honor, the defendant's belief was not in good faith. She was provided with multiple written warnings, verified by certified mail. Law enforcement had informed her directly that no such easement existed. Despite this, she trespassed repeatedly, destroyed private property, and caused significant agricultural and livestock losses. This was not ignorance. It was entitlement. The word hung in the air. Entitlement. That one stuck. The judge nodded slowly, flipping through a binder thick with exhibits, my photos, my letters, the video stills. Every ounce of patience I'd poured into paper now sat in front of her in black and white. After a pause, Judge Carson spoke, calm, measured, but firm. "Mrs. Whitfield, you have a right to defend yourself, but I've reviewed this evidence extensively. You ignored legal warnings, damaged property, and endangered livestock. I see no confusion here. I see a pattern of disregard." Karen's lawyer whispered something to her, and she stood, shaky, pale, but composed enough to read from a statement. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Your Honor, I wish I could undo what I did. I believed I had a right to use that road. I was wrong. I let anger make decisions for me. I owe Mr. Lyman an apology and restitution for what he lost." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even very emotional, but it was honest enough to make the room still for a moment. The judge nodded once, then read the ruling. Karen pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and property destruction. The embezzlement charge was being handled in a separate proceeding, but the plea would factor into sentencing later. She was ordered to pay $8,000 in restitution, covering the damaged gate, the lost crops, and Daisy's vet bill. She received 12 months of probation, a 500-foot stay-away order, and an official notation that she was barred from holding any HOA office for a minimum of 5 years. When the gavel dropped, it didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like closure. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, the sky the kind of bright blue that only happens after rain. Reporters were waiting, small-town ones with notepads and wind-blown hair. One of them asked if I wanted to comment. I shook my head. "There's nothing left to say. The facts spoke for themselves." Priya smiled slightly. "That's the beauty of paper, Nate. It never yells, but it always remembers." We walked to her truck. She looked at me, her tone softening. "You know, most people would have lost their temper months ago. You didn't. Because anger's a fire that burns both ways," I said. "I just chose to build a fence instead." She laughed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. That evening I drove home the long way, past the creek, past the hills turning green again. When I turned down my road, the signs were still there, shining in the golden light. I slowed, rolled down the window, and looked at the tire tracks, faint now, half covered by new gravel. No more Escalade, No more trespass, just quiet. Later that night, I got a message from Hank. Heard she's selling the house, Richard too, whole neighborhood's buzzing. I replied simply, good, maybe they'll find somewhere with paved roads and no conscience. I sat on the porch till the stars came out. Daisy was out in the pasture again, healthy and calm, her calf from the new season nursing by her side. The sound of crickets filled the dark, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. It hit me then. How strange it felt to have peace restored. Justice doesn't make noise. It doesn't come with applause or headlines. It just returns what was stolen, inch by inch, day by day, until all that's left is silence and dignity. I took a slow sip of coffee, watching the night settle over the land. No horns, no trespassing, no need for spike strips, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done it the right way. And in the end, that was worth more than every dollar she'd ever stolen. Summer came early that year. The corn was waist-high by June, the pasture green and full, and the mornings had that gentle smell of dew and hay I'd missed through all those months of chaos. The birds were back, the silence too. One evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the sun drift down behind the hills. The dirt road stretched straight and quiet. No fresh ruts, no engine noise. No streak of white SUV cutting through the corn. Just peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just returns like an old friend you thought you'd lost. It had been 4 months since the court case. Karen Whitfield's name had faded from the gossip pages, replaced by some other scandal down the highway. She and Richard sold their house, moved out of Meadowbrook Estates, and, according to the paper, filed for divorce soon after. The HOA elected a new board, Patricia Chen as president. I met her once in town. She shook my hand firmly and said, "Mr. Lyman, thank you for standing your ground. You reminded people here that property lines still mean something." That sentence stuck with me, not just because it was true, but because of what it implied. Somewhere along the way, folks had forgotten that boundaries aren't just fences and deeds. They're about respect. They're the invisible lines that keep a community from eating itself alive. I leaned back in my chair and thought about all the things I'd learned through this mess. People like Karen don't start out bad. They start out convinced they're special. Maybe they've gotten their way too many times. Maybe they've never been told no in a voice that holds its ground. And each time the world steps aside for them, the idea grows stronger. That rules are suggestions and consequences are for other people. But life, real life, has a way of teaching lessons that courtrooms and warnings can't. For Karen, that lesson came through 4 flat tires, a courtroom apology, and a balance sheet that didn't lie. For me, it came through patience, paperwork, and a reminder that justice doesn't always roar in with sirens. Sometimes it just walks up slow, steady, and undeniable. People online still joke about it. Every few months, a new comment pops up on some local Facebook group. "Hey, don't cut across County Road 12. You'll meet Farmer Lyman's spike strips." And I'll smile, sip my coffee, and scroll past. Because what they don't realize is, it was never about the spike strips. Those were just the punctuation mark at the end of a long sentence that started with arrogance and ended with accountability. The real victory was never her flattened tires. It was proving that decency still matters, that laws mean something when you follow them, and that patience, even when it looks like weakness, can win more battles than rage ever could. I've had neighbors ask, half jokingly, "So, you keep those strips handy just in case?" And I tell them the truth. They're locked up in the barn, haven't touched them since that day, haven't needed to. Because that's the funny thing about consequences. Once they happen, they echo. Long after the shouting ends, people remember the sound. There's a section of the fence line, down by the curve near the old oak, where the first spike strip was buried. The grass has grown over it now, wildflowers creeping in. Sometimes I stop there while checking the fence and just look at that patch of ground. Not because I'm proud of it, but because it reminds me of how close I came to losing my temper, and how different things could have gone if I had. My father used to tell me, "The strongest man isn't the one who hits back first, it's the one who knows when not to." I never really understood that until this year. The story spread farther than I expected. Folks started writing in, emails, letters, comments, people from across the country saying they'd had their own Karen. Different names, same story, someone pushing boundaries, testing patience, ignoring warnings, and most of them ended the same way. I wish I'd stood up for myself sooner. That's why I started sharing these stories in the first place. Not for sympathy, not for clicks, but because people need to be reminded that they're allowed to say no. They're allowed to defend what's theirs, legally, calmly, and with proof. Not every battle has to be fought with fists or fury. Some are won with a camera, a letter, and the quiet strength of knowing you're right. I looked out at the fading light one last time. The fence posts cast long shadows across the road, and the sign nearest the gate gleamed in the sunset. Private road, no through traffic. The same words that started it all. I smiled, finished my tea, and said out loud to no one in particular, still private, still mine. And as the first stars blinked into the evening sky, I thought about all the people out there who might be listening to this story right now. Folks dealing with their own version of a Karen, tired of being pushed, wondering if patience still matters in a world that rewards noise. If that's you, remember this. Don't fight anger with anger. Don't match lies with noise. Stand tall, stay calm, document everything, and let time and truth do the rest. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's peace. Hard-earned, honest peace. The kind that hums through a summer night on a quiet Nebraska farm, where the road is empty, the signs are clear, and every boundary finally means something again.